Assalamu alaikum everyone. So this is the third and the last video on research proposal. I did two first. I covered what do you call it, aims of the study, literature review, and methodology in the first two videos. In this one, we will cover ethics, proposed timeline for the project, and references. I have changed before we start. I have changed the dimensions of the video a little. As I said, I'm not an expert videographer, so I'm learning as I go. So I've changed a few things here based on the feedback that I received. I have no idea how this is going to come out. If the video doesn't come out well, just let me know and I'll do another one perhaps. Yeah, so getting on with it. Ethics. It's extremely important that in your research proposal you have a section dedicated to ethics, because obviously there are certain ethical issues around any research. Now, what are you going to discuss under ethics? Your participants' consent, of course. You have to mention in your research proposal that you are going to have a consent form or any document that you will send to your participants, so that they first give their consent that they are happy to be a part of your research. Extremely important, or they will never accept your proposal. Also, how will you explain the objectives of the research to your participants? They need to know. There should be no ambiguity whatsoever, and they should know exactly what they are signing up for. And then the third thing is that the data that you're going to collect, how are you going to keep it confidential? How are you going to keep it private? And also, for how long are you going to keep the data with you? Certain researchers, once they're done with the project and it has been published, after a certain amount of time they get rid of the data, which is ethical. If it's not required anymore, then it should either be returned or destroyed. So you should also think about that. You should also mention in your research proposal under ethics that what are you going to do with the data and how are you going to keep it confidential. That's something that you must think about. Also, you must also mention that you will let your participants know that they have the right to stop participating whenever they want. Somebody might, give you their consent. They might start participating, being a part of your research, but while you're conducting that research, if they change their mind and they don't want to be part of that research anymore, they have that right. So they have the right to do so. So just make sure that you explain that part to your participants as well, and you must mention that in your research proposal too, that I will let the participants know that they have the right to withdraw whenever they want. Internal review boards. So internal review boards, or IRBs as they are usually called. You see, in certain research work, there are human subjects involved. If there are human subjects involved, then it's critical that you have to go and speak to IRB, wherever you are, or whatever university, doesn't really matter, and you have to get their consent. So please touch upon that as well under ethics, that I am going to make sure that I will go to the internal review board if required and get their consent too. So ethics, very quickly, your participants' consent, extremely important. How are you going to take their consent? The explanation, a very thorough explanation of your research is required. They should know exactly what they are signing up for. They should know exactly what they're going to be part of. No ambiguity, as I said, whatsoever. Data privacy and confidentiality. How are you going to keep it private, keep it confidential? And what are you going to do with the data once your research is done? The participants, they should have the right to stop participating whenever they want. So and they must be informed about that as well before you start your the whole research thing. And IRBs, internal review boards, if their consent is required, what are you going to do? How are you going to have a discussion with them, especially if there are human subjects involved? So that's something that you must cover under ethics. Moving on to the next one, or the second last part of your research proposal, which is your proposed timeline for the project. That's an easy one, really. I mean, you have to have some idea. Again, when you start the project itself, obviously as you progress, it tells you what to do with it. So that's fine, but you need to have some idea before you start that this is when I'm going to start, these are the steps, and this is when I'm going to finish. So a tentative idea as to when are you going to start, when are you going to finish. So proposed timeline for the project, like for example, if it's a 12-month project, let's say, you're starting and you think that in 12 months I'll be done with it, you should, define the steps as best as you can. Like in the first 3 months, for example, I'm just going to be reading. In the following 3 months, I will start collecting data. And then, in month, for example, in the second last quarter of my research, I am going to, sit down and analyze the data. And last 3 months, I will only be, drafting the research proposal, writing, editing, and things like that. This is just to explain, how it works. Essentially, this is just an example. Obviously, for every project, for every individual, the timeline is going to be different, and the steps are going to be different. But no matter what, you have to have that in your research proposal, so that again the reader gets an idea that you have given enough thought to it. You have thought about your research project from every angle, and you are essentially prepared, right? The last section is an easy one. It's just references. I'll do a separate video on references as well. Normally for, in your literature review, whatever research you are going to quote, in your references, you need to have like a list of references where you need to follow. Usually people follow APA style referencing. So you need to have the list of your references under references. You can follow any style, really. It doesn't really have to be APA. Normally people follow APA. The one thing that I usually do is that sometimes, I go to whoever I'm sending this proposal to, I go to that professor. Again, I stalk them a little. I check their work. I go to their articles, and I see, if there is a pattern there, if there's a certain referencing style that they like to follow. So I just check that. So if it's something, other than APA, and if I know it, I follow that. It's just something that I do. You don't really have to do that. You don't really have to do that. If you know APA, then APA is fine. At the end of the day, you're just starting your research journey. You're not an expert, so that's fine. And they know that. They know that. They just want to see that you have the ability to think from every angle and try to cover everything as best as you can. That's the main thing. So I'll quickly repeat that. What we have covered in this video is ethics. Under ethics, you need to have your participants' consent. How are you going to take that consent? How well are you going to explain the research project to them? There should be no ambiguity whatsoever. Data privacy and confidentiality. How are you going to keep it confidential? How are you going to keep it private? And what are you going to do with it once your project is done? Your participants will have the right to withdraw if they want to. If they don't want to continue, then they have the right to stop being a part of your research. And then your IRBs or internal review boards. If human subjects are involved, then how are you going to follow that process? That's under ethics. And then the proposed timeline for the project. All steps should be very well defined. First 3 months for this, and then 3 months for that, 6 months for that, whatever your project. So you're in charge. So you have to decide that. But something of that sort should be there, step by step description of your of the progression of your project, and then references. APA style referencing is acceptable. Generally, it's acceptable. So if you're sending a proposal, just make sure whatever research work you have covered in your literature review, just make sure that you quote following APA style referencing under references. So hopefully this video combined with the first 2 videos that I did on research proposal, if I have tried my best. As I said in my very first video, it's a very complicated, not a very complicated, but a slightly complicated document. So I've tried my best to cover all key parts. Hopefully, all 3 videos, if seen together in a sequence, they should help. Yeah. Let me know if there are any questions, as always, and happy to answer. Happy to get back to you guys. Thank you very much. I love this.